lesson this week, and expect this is not going to be a great deep discussion. And on my part here, I expect we'll hopefully have some back and forth come Monday, insofar as the issue, the unit is titled Economic Issues Part 1. And basically it looks at the relationship between public policy, that is government policy, and the economy. Again, our continuum: complete free economy, no government; all government, no free economy. Again, even in that continuum, even when you're over here like we are, there is going to be necessarily a tremendous impact from the government on the economy. And that has increasingly become the case. The arc of U.S. history has been towards much greater government involvement in the economy. A lot of the questions we ask ourselves about government involvement in the economy have to do with our old competition between freedom and security. As time has gone along, as we've gotten more comfortable generally in our lives, we, and I say that just generally speaking, not every single person obviously, but we, the people, have started to demand more security from our government, even if it costs freedom. Again, I think you know where I stand on that, but that's history. That has happened. And to act like it hasn't would be foolhardy and incorrect. That has been the arc of U.S. history, and it is accelerating today in these very unusual times. We'll talk about it. Basically, we're going to look at just a handful of hot-button topics as they pertain to public policy and the economy. Again, the one problem that we will look at, it's a problem, it's kind of an overriding issue, is the fact that where the government is involved, the almost always correct theory of supply and demand does not always apply. When you can print your own money, when you don't have to be successful, when you don't have to make the right choice, then you are not under the same pressures as those who do. Therefore, the laws of supply and demand tend to evaporate when government is involved. These are hot-button issues we're going to be talking about, and I want to talk about them face-to-face in terms of what you think we should be doing as a nation, collectively, from an economic standpoint in particular. Again, we weigh all these issues. There is the very real human cost of some of these issues that we'll talk about, but there's also the very real economic costs to all these issues. The economic impact of healthcare in the United States simply cannot be overstated. About a fourth of the federal budget goes to pay for healthcare, mostly through Medicare and Medicaid. It is a leviathan. There's no doubt about it. And of course, I've very recently seen a lot more of the healthcare industry than I ever hoped to. But it reminds us, because of its importance and because of the nature of healthcare, you don't get much more personal than, like I did, someone jabbing a knife into you and cutting open a 1.5 foot hole and shoving something in after cutting something. You don't get much more personal than that. So we're talking about a very, very personal thing for every person. But it is very difficult to separate the study of economics from politics and personal impact. But we're going to try here. In the past, used to be medical services were like any other service. You went, got the service, you paid for it. Simple as that. Boy, that seems like it's a million miles away these days. That simply does not happen anymore because of government involvement. And we're not even a nation that has complete government control of healthcare. Among Western nations, we're still one of the freest in that respect. But even with that, the idea of you going to a doctor and getting a service done and paying the doc, $25, that doesn't happen anymore. Insurance and government regulations govern just about every aspect of the healthcare industry now. The idea behind insurance, the concept of insurance, And in human history, it's not a brand new concept, but certainly its universal adoption has been staggering in the past century. The idea behind insurance is to share the risk of expense, basically in this case with medical expenses, to make sure that the risk is evenly applied across a large number of people. Health insurance really picked up after World War II, when some of the government price controls were still in effect, and industries were trying to find new ways to lure the best and brightest of workers, particularly all these fresh young military men and women who were returning from overseas looking for full-time work. One of the ways they found to do it was with the promise of health insurance to help cover catastrophic expenses, to help cover those sometimes... Yeah, this is going to be an edit on the final version here, I think, of the ECON video, as you hear the dog in the background. Anyway, the growth of health insurance has had two economic impacts. And again, the study of economy is first and foremost a study of human behavior. Yes, there's mathematics, but there is human behavior. There is supply, demand, but there is human behavior, human nature. You have to take that into account when making broad economic decisions. The first impact was that since insured people didn't have to pay all their medical expenses, the demand for medical treatment increased. Yeah, the employee paying all or part of the premium. All of a sudden, if you go to a doctor and there's no money changing hands, you're starting to think, well, it's no big deal. I can go here any time I want to. If you don't feel the financial impact of the premiums, the tendency for human behavior, is to utilize the service without considering the cost. Where if you were able to buy gasoline without having to pay for anything, you wouldn't think twice about filling up your tank, filling up 10 tanks or whatever is all you wanted. Again, when you're not hurt by the cost, your behavior changes. Employer-provided health insurance brought about what economists called then and still call today something called a moral hazard. That's a term you should remember, moral hazard. It's the tendency of people to engage in riskier behavior if someone else is going to pay for the possible consequence of that behavior. Again, that's human nature. If doing the wrong thing doesn't cost you anything, you are going to do the wrong thing more often than would otherwise be the case. If you were going to be the one to pay the consequences, it is less likely that you will do the wrong thing. You will weigh the possible consequences of a decision and will act accordingly. The second impact of employer-sponsored health insurance was that the increased demand, here we go, supply and demand again, the increased demand drove up the cost of medical care, and it's still going up. When that demand goes up, boy, oh howdy, the price is going to go up. Insurance companies began providing more individual policies after that, and it got to the point where pretty much every working adult in the U.S. Was insured to some degree. Then in the 1960s, the federal government got directly involved in the idea. Again, a well-intentioned program. Medicare, insurance coverage for the elderly, Medicaid for the poor. No one wants the elderly to not have proper health insurance. No one wants the poor to not have proper health care. No one wants that. But again, what happened to the cost? Through the roof. Because now, government was paying for it. Not Aetna or Allstate or H&R Block. No, federal government's paying for it now. Katie bar the door. We can get anything done. There's the old privateer's quote about dealing with the government in the Civil War is true of all governments at all times. You can sell anything to the government at any price you got the guts to ask. Why? Because the government guy or girl does not have to worry about price containment. They don't have to worry about personally sacrificing if they don't make the right or best purchasing decision. their job is still intact. If you, as a homeowner or adult, make the wrong decision, you pay. Therefore, you're going to do your homework, more likely, and make the right decision. When governments step in and start paying for things, the cost will go up. You guys are learning a little bit more about college tuition now. You want to know one of the reasons college tuition has increased 15-fold over the past 2 generations? Government underwriting the loans for government underwriting college loans. There's no risk now for the college to take in Johnny Doe from Brookville, Virginia. Federal government's got him covered. We can take him in, take 20 more like him. Government's going to pay for it. Cost goes up. Why? Because they can. Because that $10,000 tuition, well, our tuition is now $25,000. Why? Well, because. Pay it. And again, because the laws of supply and demand are not in effect here, it's not a free market. And the free market principles do not apply. Again, that's the downside. The upside is, of course, we want the service to be available for poor people, for elderly people. Of course we do. But when the entity paying for it has no concern about spending, then the cost per service is going to go up, also for those who are not on government assistance. Medical costs have continued to rise faster than the overall rate of inflation for the past 30 years, past 50 years now, I would say, as the amounts for usual and customary charges have changed. Since the federal government now pays a large portion of medical expenses, the government, for the most part, determines what's an acceptable medical charge. And as we cede more authority, this will continue to happen. And again, there's the emotional side of this debate. Again, I've mentioned it. Nobody wants to have people suffer. Nobody wants to. But our answer is to put an unaccountable entity in charge of it, an entity that does not have to worry about cost containment. That's why healthcare is so expensive. Why? Because the government is paying for it and will pay for it and will continue to pay for it. Health care is more expensive per capita in the U.S. than any other nation in the world, and it is not even close. Now, there's some extra factors at play here in the United States as opposed to other countries. Number one, here in the U.S., so much as possible, healthcare providers can use high-tech scanners, complex lab tests, robotic surgery, and products that are not available in every single other country. We've come a long way in healthcare, but that progress has not been free. Also, again, we mentioned this, someone besides the patient is paying the cost. And when you don't have to pay for a service, you're going to utilize that service as much as possible without a thought to cost and containment. Another factor is the U.S. is the world's leading developer of prescription drugs, which, of course, have just, in my lifetime, have just, we have medicine for everything now. A drug company has to spend millions and millions of dollars to develop a new drug. Then they have to sell the drug. They must get approval, of course, from the FDA. And then there's patent protection for a 7-year period once that's secured. It's costly. It costs a lot. One good thing potentially from this pandemic, the vaccines that everyone's getting right now, they did not go through the same battery of FDA tests as other drugs had in the past because of the urgency of the pandemic. Maybe, a lot of these tests aren't necessary. Maybe. Unfortunately, that would mean government ceding some of its authority, lessening some of its power, so it's unlikely to happen. But if it did, boy, that would be one very good outcome of this pandemic. And of course, doctors tend to practice defensive medicine. Nothing wrong with that. When a patient has a problem, sometimes doctors are going to order lots of tests. Some of the tests are probably not necessary, but the doctor, again, wants to use all the tools available because they're a doctor. And because we have those tools available here in the United States. Medical malpractice insurance, of course, it dictates that he covers his butt or her butt as much as possible. So again, they're going to err very, very much on the side of caution. The biggest move in the last generation in terms of government oversight of healthcare was the Affordable Care Act of 2010. The biggest thing it did was to mandate that people have insurance and that they get it from either a private company or one of the new government exchanges that were set up. Again, if you want to make increase the participation in healthcare, then yeah, that would be a fine way to do it. One of the bigger impacts of this, and again, this is someone who's lived through it, and you guys have lived through it mostly through your childhood, so it didn't affect you. When this happened, a lot of the restrictions were placed on those businesses that were providing insurance as part of full-time employment. And when it became a mandate that they had to do that, well, of course, the cost for insurance companies went through the roof because they could not deny someone with pre-existing conditions or high risk or whatever, like any insurance company would do. You get into 10 accidents, there's not a car insurance company that's going to insure you. If you have, stage 4 cancer, you are a very high risk to an insurance company. But under the Obamacare, which is the Affordable Care Act, they had to accept you. So what are they going to do? Raise premiums. That's exactly what happened. God, I remember saying that to people in 2010. This is what's going to happen. And there's some of the people who were so emotionally invested in this saying, you beast, you monster, how can you not want people to have health? Well, that's not the case. But this is what is going to happen because health insurance companies are like any other business. If they don't make money, they're no longer a business. They disappear. A lot of the business reaction to this has been to not hire so darn many full-time. Gig economy. Hire people on a vendor basis. That's how I make my job, my living right now, is working on a gig basis, on a performance basis. Very few, the old idea of you getting a job with a company, getting other insurance, retiring 40 years later with a gold watch, that just doesn't happen anymore. Because it cannot happen, not under the new regulations. Healthcare is what is called a distorted market. Again, because we're talking about heavy government involvement and government not having to obey the laws of supply and demand, it's not a free market, it's a distorted market, and in a distorted market, free market principles do not work. Government regulations tend to put a ceiling on prices that healthcare providers can charge. And again, here's one of the things we can debate. As this control continues to increase, and certainly that's the way the political winds are blowing now, the old argument of death panels, rationing of healthcare, it'll have to happen. It has to. I hate that. That's why I want no part of it. Many other reasons too. But yeah, in order for cost containment, we are going to put the federal government in charge of making, again, some very, very, very personal decisions. Unless our country makes a dramatic shift to let the free market work its magic in healthcare, these trends will continue. Is healthcare a public good that government should provide? That's the question I want to debate on Monday. And if so, how much? Edit time here. Oh, let's talk about Social Security and Medicare. That was the big generation, or big debate a generation before healthcare. Again, nobody wants anyone to go without. Nobody wants anyone to die without, dignity. No one wants that. But again, we put an entity that's not constrained by price control in charge of it, and then the costs are going to go up for everyone. Social Security dates back to the Great Depression, 1935. The idea was that workers would, through government force, contribute into Social Security fund, such as it was, and the government would take that money, invest it, secure it, whatever, and it would be available for you to be paid back to you after you reach a certain age. And at the time, the U.S. had 40 workers for every one retiree. Today, it's 2 to 1. I'm sorry, it's 3 to 1 now. It's going to be 2 to 1 very, very soon. You see the problem. Plus, people are living longer. In 1935, life expectancy was about 72 or 73, so with a 65 retirement age, on average, someone was going to be drawing down on Social Security for a decade or so. Not the case now. Life expectancy is longer, and of course, medical care has gotten much better, and so there are many, many people that spend decades drawing down Social Security and end up taking out more than they probably paid in. Again, math is math, and that kind of math is not sustainable. You can't make 2 and 2 5. Now, again, as we've moved on in history, we've added to Social Security. Social Security disability payments began in 1957. Last checked, about 44 million people were getting Social Security / disability benefits. The Social Security system, this is one of the few things that every politician agrees, that the Social Security system is facing a looming financial disaster. That's not even in dispute. No one has the courage to do something about it. It's called the third rail of American politics. Because a third rail is the electrified rail on a train that actually provides the energy. You don't touch the third rail, you get electrocuted. Everyone knows Social Security can't continue indefinitely the way it's set up now, but no one wants to make the hard choices to make it last longer. There are lots of things we could do that would not endanger too many politicians, I guess. You can hike the retirement age up a bit. There could be a means test to determine if someone actually needs the Social Security. Of course, if you paid into it for all those years, it's not unreasonable to expect it there, as it was promised, because they didn't get your permission to take it from you, now did they? Government could increase the payroll tax rate. Current workers would likely see that as just a tax and not a contribution towards future benefits, and rightly so. It would be functionally a tax. And again, we've mentioned Medicare, of course, that kind of falls under all this. And again, the same issues apply here insofar as the fact that because the federal government does not have to obey the laws of supply and demand, they are not going to be the wisest purchaser of services, and they will necessarily will make more bad choices. Let's talk about energy briefly. Again, the big thing in energy occurred really in my childhood when I was just a few years old, when for the first time in American history, after we became dependent on oil, we found out that it was nations in the Middle East that could really, really squeeze us if they wanted to, and they did. We have become much more independent in that respect since then. Plus, coal is about 30% of our energy now. Natural gas is about 35%, and we have large reserves of natural gas. Again, because energy is such an essential part of living now, necessarily there are going to be government regulations on it, and necessarily the government regulations are going to be put in sometimes without sensitivity to the laws of supply and demand. That's been an issue ever since government found out that this is something they could regulate. The potential trade-off to continued reliance on fossil fuels, of course, is the potential for environmental damage. We have made great strides in the last 50 years in minimizing that. Of course, right now, as we speak, the boogeyman of climate change, which assumes that the earth is on fire and man is terrible and we must do everything but revert to an agrarian society in order to fight it. That's kind of the political issue du jour these days. It's climate change. The way it is being presented is hogwash. We will survive this apocalypse. When I was a kid, it was the ice age that was going to kill us. Then it was the killer bees. Anyway, very depressing to see history repeating itself just so blatantly and obviously. Alt fuels are becoming a thing more and more. They will continue to become a thing more and more. The millisecond that alternative sources of fuel become more profitable than fossil fuels, you would not be able to stop their proliferation if you tried. That is capitalism. That's economy. That is supply and demand. Once it gets to the point where you could make a unit of solar energy more cheaply than you can coal and have it go further, once it's more profitable, we're going to be seeing solar everywhere. We're going to be seeing hydro everywhere. But you can't rush technology. We're learning. We're doing it every year. We're doing more and more and more, and we're getting better and better and better. But until we find a way to power a 757 with a battery, it's going to have to be fossil fuels. Nuclear power is also a very tempting option. Unfortunately, nuclear power has been demagogued because of some very high-profile accidents. 3 Mile Island here in the U.S. was barely a blip on the radar. Chernobyl was bad. That was a terrible, terrible... U.S. actually got more radiation from Chernobyl than it did 3 Mile Island. But because of some high-profile issues with nuclear power, some people are reluctant. It is extremely efficient, though. And anyone who claims to be one of these climate change aficionados who poo-poos nuclear power, I turn them off immediately. You're not serious. The cost of building nuclear facilities is also a major, major issue. There's so many permits and regulations. Again, government inserting itself into the equation. Kind of as a sidebar to the energy discussion, the government regulations on automobiles, again, that was impacted greatly by the Arab oil embargo of 1973, where we found out that, yes, this culture we had created, this auto-centric culture, as I heard somebody describe it once, where, basically if you didn't have a car, you were not part of society. You couldn't walk everywhere the way we had built society, particularly with suburbs coming into vogue in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. The idea that you could survive without a car was not true in most places. Now, another issue where, again, the economy and the government mesh sometimes to a great degree is housing. Everybody needs a place to stay. Buying a home is usually the single largest purchase a person will make, far and away. Very, very few exceptions. And, of course, one of the ways we gauge the strength of an economy is the robustness of the housing market. It is, and again, if you think about it just from more than a number standpoint, home ownership best exemplifies the institution of private property. It is your private property. Here in the U.S., it's called the American dream, to own your own piece of land, to own your own home. People owning homes as opposed to renting homes brings stability to a neighborhood. People who own things will take better care of them than people who are renting things. That's, again, we go back to human nature. You have to put the human factor into all of your discussions or looks at the economy. The total value of American housing right now is about $30 trillion, just to give you an idea of how big an industry this is. Now, it's so ingrained into us Americans that home ownership is a good thing, that's something you should strive for, that even people who have hang-ups about the very idea of indebtedness will forgive a home mortgage, because it's a home. Again, it costs a lot. Very few people can pay for a home out of pocket. That's something you have to borrow for. So even people who are stringently opposed to even the very concept of indebtedness will make exceptions for home ownership. That's how important we view it. Mortgages, we have found in recent years, even though that's always been the case, your home mortgage, that debt you owe on your house, is actually an asset. It is a tangible asset that can be sold. And we've seen it a lot with, I can tell you here in this lovely little house that you see here, my mortgage has been sold from a bank to a lending institution to another lending institution in just 20 years. It is an asset. It is currency in that respect. And we've also found out that some mortgages are toxic assets, insofar as the person who got that loan can't pay it back. And all of a sudden, that mortgage with that value, if you foreclose or foreclosed upon, everybody loses. No one wants to have that. The bank doesn't want that. The lender doesn't want that. You don't want that, but it still happens. We're going to talk in a week, I think in 2 weeks, about the very, very real issues that toxic home mortgages played in the 2007 recession. And it, I want to say it crippled an economy, but boy, it knocked us for a loop. Probably just as much, maybe not quite as much as COVID-19 did, but it was a major, major issue. But again, it's one of those places where government and the economy have merged to the point where they're just inseparable. Very, very hard to differentiate. I want to talk to you on Monday about your thoughts on some of these issues just as a human being, as an American, as a Christian. Let's look at the ways you think about these, the ways you think we, the people of the United States, should tackle these very, very thorny issues. We'll do it online Monday, and maybe next Monday, I don't know, maybe I can find a ride. Anyway, take care, guys.